Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I'm Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. Hey, I've had an opportunity to go back and do some rehashing of this year's legislative session, do a little bit of an autopsy, if you would. And when going back and tracing some of the legislative history on House Bill 1240, the assault weapons ban, I began to go down a rabbit hole, if you would, where some sources that were cited on certain people's websites that led me to believe that perhaps they were being influenced by other things. And it led me to this alarming conclusion that who we elect to go to Olympia is not who's writing our laws. No, in fact, representative government appears to be quite dead in Washington State. I'm going to connect some of the dots for you. I'm going to explain how, because this is really, really troubling. And what's at stake? Well, it's your constitutional rights. Case in point, the most recent legislative session. So today, let's spend a few very troubling minutes and talk about the legislators that will cut and paste laws to take your rights. Okay, before we get going down the road, we're going down. Proud to announce that this video is being brought to you by Mill Pond Arms, LLC. That's right. East Wenatchee's premier FFL is located right here in East Wenatchee. Now listen, in addition to being an FFL SOT, they got all the reloading supplies, they got new, they got used, and they got a silencer kiosk. So stop on by, see my good friends. You can visit them at millpondarms.com. Okay, so the topic we're talking about is kind of a post-mortem autopsy on our 2023 legislative session, which, as we know, did not go particularly well. Now, I was going back, taking a look at the bills, taking a look at some of the legislative history, taking a look at some of the sponsors of the bills and other things, and it started leading me down this wormhole, if you would, where eventually I kept finding the same set of data cited by the same group of politicians, and it comes from the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, always a very objective organization. And this particular document was entitled Gun Violence in Washington State by the Numbers. Now, if you go back and you look at the legislative history, and if you go back and you take a look at what many of these politicians cited ad nauseum over and over and over, you will realize that what's written here by the Alliance for Gun Responsibility is actually all the talking points that was used by all the gun grabbing left in Olympia. Now, here's the thing. When we take a look at the data, and we take a look at how they use it as talking points, we'll see that, well, you know what? The data, shockingly, didn't support any of the legislation that was passed this year. In fact, the data doesn't even necessarily support the conclusion that there's a problem with any of the things that were banned this year, let alone giving us any reason to believe that it's going to fix the problem. Now, to give you an overall flavor of what this report is all about and some of its credibility, here are some of the facts that they pointed out. Facts. Every year, 810 Washingtonians are killed by guns, a rate of 10.5 per 100,000 people. And I will point out that those numbers have continually gone up every year despite all of this gun control legislation. But as horrible as those numbers sound, I want you to pay very careful attention to the next piece of data. 74% of gun deaths in Washington State are suicides. Okay, did you catch that? So there is approximately 810 deaths per year by guns in Washington State. And we're going to start breaking that number down here in a minute, okay? But we just learned in the very next data point that 3/4 of those individuals, roughly 600 and change, are from self-inflicted gun wounds. What else does the data say? Gun violence is the leading cause of death for children and teens. Okay, we're going to circle back on that one, but yeah, you know it's not going to be strokes, heart attacks, or cancer because that's not how the actuary table works, okay? In fact, it's always going to be some type of cataclysmic event that's going to be the leading cause of death for young people. But then there's more to the data, including this. More than 34% of Washingtonians report having a firearm in their household. And you can see that makes it seem like, hey, listen, literally 1/3 of your state is dangerous. 1/3 of your state is are complete whack jobs. Candidly, I'd like to see the numbers much higher than that. I do believe an armed society is a polite society. Here's some of the other data, though. Only 36% of people in gun-owning households practice safe storage, keeping firearms locked and unloaded. Of course, the other 64% may be those who live alone in a condo all by themselves with no children or grandchildren to be seen anywhere, and I don't candidly care if they keep it under their pillow at night. So again, it begins to show you the slant, the bias that they're trying to take with this study. Now, I want to circle back on the number of people killed by guns in the state of Washington, because as we know from the Alliance for Gun Responsibility's own data, okay, as you can see right here, they put this little graph right there, and you can see that 74% of all gun deaths are self-inflicted wounds. And oh, by the way, if you take a look down there at the very bottom, yeah, mass shootings actually accounts for less than 1%. And of course, that is the scourge of the assault weapon problem that needed to be addressed right away. Now, they also give some other points to help better explain the data, and I want to go over a few of those because each and every time they open their mouths, they paint a more clearer picture, and it's one that clearly does not support the legislation. Take, for example, this. Suicide. The vast majority of gun deaths in Washington state, about 74%, are suicide. Homicides, including police shootings, account for 24% of all gun deaths in the state and disproportionately impact black communities. So the data is including 199 police shootings, of which we do not know how many of them were actually unlawful, but considering how few have actually been in the paper as being unlawful uses of force, we can assume that a huge majority of these are actually lawful uses of lethal force. There's a couple other talking points, including one about domestic violence. 56% of intimate partner homicides in Washington are carried out with firearms. Perpetrators of domestic violence homicide in Washington use firearms more often than all other weapons combined. Women account for 87% of intimate partner homicide victims in Washington. And perhaps that would be a reason to allow women greater access to firearms and their right of self-preservation rather than thwarting their ability to arm themselves. So the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, which publishes all the talking points for the gun-grabbing left, pumps out all of this data, and none of this data supports any of the legislation. So where does the idea come from? Oh, well, shockingly, the Alliance for Gun Responsibility also has a 2023 policy agenda. And guess what? It sounds hauntingly familiar. Take a look at what's on their policy agenda. This is what they were proposing as far as legislative policies nationwide. Restrict access to assault weapons. Semi-automatic assault weapons have been used in the 5 deadliest shootings in U.S. history. These weapons were designed for the battlefield. They have no place in our neighborhoods. And of course, my friends, that turns out to be House Bill 1240. But there's more. Require a permit to purchase firearms. Permit to purchase systems require a comprehensive background check, safety training, and a waiting period to purchase a firearm. States with permit to purchase laws have lower rates of firearm-related death, lower rates of gun diverted to criminals shortly after retail sale, and lower rates of guns exported to criminals in other states. Of course, they cite to not one single footnote of data to support any of that, but of course that then becomes House Bill 1143. And there's more. Protect progress and continue momentum. Washington must build on recent strides made to prevent gun violence by closing dangerous loopholes, extending purchase requirements to all firearms, continuing to align victim protection processes, and strengthening our voluntary waiver program. And there are components in House Bill 1143 as well as Senate Bill 5006 in its entirety that does exactly this. There is more. Restore local authority. Local leaders are best positioned to address the challenges facing their communities. They should be empowered to make decisions about gun safety to keep their community safe. Gun violence prevention can and should happen at every level of government. This, of course, was the failed House Bill 1178, which would have completely eviscerated state preemption law. Wasn't for a lack of effort, it's just a lack of resources. They had so many other ways they wanted to strip you of your rights this year. And then a final legislative agenda item would include establish pathways to justice for gun violence victims. Federal law has shielded the gun industry, dealers, and manufacturers from nearly all accountability for the danger and damages their products cause. Washington can hold gun industry members accountable by ensuring a level playing field for responsible industry members, incentivizing safe and responsible business practices, and establishing a pathway for individuals to seek justice in court for harms caused by the industry. And of course, all of that then is Senate Bill 5078, or as I call the Put the FFL Out of Business Act of 2023, also signed into legislation. So now, as you can see, that all of the legislation that we offered, that was debated and was passed and signed into law this year, apparently comes directly off the Alliance for Gun Responsibility's legislative agenda action items. Now, it would almost be a perfect storm if somehow or another we could connect the dots and prove that, in fact, the group, Alliance for Gun Responsibility, as well as any of these other outside organizations, Everytown and all the Michael Bloomberg groups and all of that, was actually writing the legislation, right? That would be the perfect smoking gun. Well, lo and behold, it appears that that is exactly the case, because it appears that Ari Hoffman, a local journalist, as well as President Nonfud, a pretty interesting account to follow on Twitter, but as you can see from these tweets, and we'll link them all up in our description box down below, they have obtained, through the Freedom of Information Act, emails between Representative Liz Berry as well as State Senator Jesse Solomon as they traded drafts of legislation back and forth with these groups and changed the legislation at the bequest of these outside groups. What does this mean for you, the lawful and responsible gun owner in Washington State? Well, it's really simply put, is that we are supposed to operate on representative government. But you see, what happens is no matter who we elect to go to Olympia, what is happening is those on the gun-grabbing left are working with outside organizations, very well-funded, very powerful outside organizations, outside the state of Washington, of which you have no control over, who is then literally drafting verbatim the laws that they want implemented in this state because they know what's best for us here. And while these legislators hear the comment after comment and the ratio of negative comments against this legislation and ignore everything that the people in the state of Washington have to say to them, they listen and act to the beck and call of these outside agencies, even to the tune of actually allowing them to draft the very laws that strip you of your otherwise inalienable rights. Listen, we're going to invite Representative Liz Berry. We're going to invite Senator Manka Dhingra. We're going to invite Senator Jesse Solomon to come onto the channel. We're probably even going to make that invitation to Representative Strom Peterson. They were some of the biggest proponents of this legislation, and we would certainly give them the opportunity to have the floor to explain how is it that they came up with all of these ideas. Now, in the meantime, if any of you have any questions about this or anything, what's left of our Second Amendment rights, you guys should know how to contact Washington Gun Law by now, but if you don't, that's okay, because that information is right there in the description box. In the meantime, I do want all of you to remember that part of being the lawful and responsible gun owner, like we talk about all the time here, is to know what the law is in every situation and how it applies to you in any instance that you may find yourself. Until next time, thanks for watching, and stay safe.